Okay guys, don't forget to subscribe, push that like button and the notification bell if you like getting notifications on new uploads. Welcome to part 2 of Talking News. We're talking about the Maleah Davis and the people involved in her case. Right now we're speaking about Equifax and Tim Miller, who is the one volunteering a lot of hours out there trying to locate Maleah Davis. They believe that she may be deceased. So, we already went over the first part of Tim Miller stories. If you have not seen that, go to part 1. But what we're finding out is his story is it's incredibly raw. A lot going on there that probably a lot of us have never heard about. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and continue with that now. And then we're going to cover the updates on Maleah Davis. Now, in part 1, we were learning about Abel and that, he struck police as off. Then, the city detective Gary Bittner received an unexpected phone call from Abel's third wife, Paula Myers. Abel had a sinister side, she said. An explosive bout of anger and cruelty. Does this sound familiar? Remember Patrick Frazee in the Kelsey Berry case. So yeah, they're saying that Abel had a very cruel side. He had never hurt her, but she'd witnessed him beating his horses and claimed, collaborated by Cindy Jacobs, another of Abel's ex-wives. Jacobs' marriage to Abel had ended after only 41 days, and their friends and acquaintances had always wondered what happened. So what we're hearing now is investigators learned the reason why they divorced in 41 days or separated. We don't know. Jacobs had declined sex with Abel one evening, and she said he flew into her frightening rage. So Myers told the police another strange detail. When livestock died on Abel's ranch land, he left their bodies out there to be eaten by scavengers. Hearing that, one couldn't help but think of the 4 bodies posed and left to rot in the oil field. But who could dump multiple bodies next to his own property? The League City Police and Houston FBI asked that the FBI Behavior Science Unit in, I guess this is Quantico, Virginia. They asked him for assistance in compiling a profile of a killer. Results came in, and the killer would be highly intelligent, arrogant about his intelligence, and given to outbursts in anger. He would have a history of bad relationships with his women and cruelty to animals. He might live near a crime scene. He would closely follow news coverages of the killings, and if presented with the opportunity, he might try to infiltrate the investigation under another, outlook as a person that's just trying to help. Now, police did not have any evidence linking Robert Abel to the murders. In 1993, they used the FBI profile to convince a judge to grant a search warrant. Okay, guys, I don't know about you, but I think that's kind of scary that they're just going off of assumption. So, investigators searched Abel's house and property for 12 hours. They took a gold tooth they found and cased it. It was a souvenir Abel had taken from one of the victims. They took his guns and to check them against the bullet found in Jane Doe that they found on the oil field. They took news clippings he collected about the stories, the bodies that were found in the oil field. So The police tested everything and arrived right back where they started. The tooth was Abel's. The bullet from Jane Doe was too corroded to match Abel's gun, and the photos yielded nothing. There was still no physical evidence linking Abel to the killings. In our Equusearch, Tim Miller had been following the investigation the entire time and very carefully. He now believed that Abel had killed his daughter. So Miller decided that if the police couldn't prove it, that Abel had done it, he would. Tim said, "I made Robert's life pretty miserable," Miller told me. He began parking his car outside of Abel's house, making no effort to conceal his surveillance. He wanted Abel to know he was watching. "I would go by his house so much it was nuts," Miller said. 2 or 3 times a day, he left threatening messages. Abel ended up getting a restraining order. Miller just kept watching Abel's house anyway, parking his car a few feet past the property line. Then one day, according to a 1999 Texas Monthly article, Miller called Robert and told him he planned to kidnap him and drive him to Nevada and bury him alive in the desert. Wow, Tim, that's not making you any better than any murderer, really. And I think, he'll figure that out later. He didn't, but he did confront Abel outside of his house. He put a .357 at Robert's head. And the man he confessed to killing Laura before driving away and checking himself into a hospital. So Tim ended up checking himself into a hospital. Robert Abel later denied that the gun incident occurred, possibly, according to Miller, because Abel was embarrassed. I don't think he was embarrassed. I think he was forgiving. So in the years that followed, Tim Miller threw all of that anger and energy into helping missing person searches across the country and became a frequent guest on unsolved crime shows like America's Most Wanted. One of the lessons he learned from Laura's disappearance was the importance of stoking attention on cases, keeping the media's interest and the police under pressure. And guys, this is true. This is why I keep pushing these stories. And if you see me push a story, please make sure you share it, especially if it's one you haven't heard in a while, like Savannah Spurlock. Then it happened again. In April 1997, 12-year-old Laura Smither disappeared while jogging near Friendswood home. Her body was found later that month in a retention pond not that far away. So after Kane disappeared, Miller and 200 local people decided on to do a search of Abel's property without a search warrant, without his permission. They marched onto the ranch and raked it over, looking for bodies, but they found nothing. And due to the fact that Robert Abel was going through all this, at this point, they say that he was a lonely man. His once prosperous trail rides business was going under from lack of customers, a blow that struck particularly hard. Robert was a rocket science, and that's a true statement literally, but a country boy at heart. And he loves Stardust trail rides, Miller says. And then after a while of calming down, a disturbing realization began to nag at Tim Miller. What if Abel wasn't guilty? Which is it sounds like the fact to me. Then Tim thinks to himself, what if it is Hendrick? What if it was him the whole time? Miller told a journalist that he deeply regrets his role in rallying people in a man he believes, in retrospect, was not guilty. The two men later reconciled a few years before Abel died. They passed each other driving, and Miller hailed him. According to this article, they said that they pulled their cars over, and Miller approached him and said, "I'm going to ask for your forgiveness. I know I do not deserve it." He asked Abel if he could hug him, and they both cried. But it was too late, really, because Tim basically destroyed the life of that man because he was impatient and angry. In 2005, Miller was working on a search in Aruba when an FBI agent called. Quote, "Did you hear the news?" End quote. An agent said, "Robert is dead." A train struck Robert Abel as he drove an ATV over the railroad crossings near his family ranch in Belleville. The train engineer later told Miller that Robert Abel had actually braked next to the railroad crossing, watching the train, waiting. So looks like it could have been a suicide, which was probably brought on to the fact that he was being accused, or the fact he could have been guilty. You don't know. You have to wonder, does Tim Miller wonder if he was a killer himself, bugging Robert Abel to death to where he took his life? He must have changed his mind about Robert Abel, because he later pushes investigators to investigate Clyde Hendrick as a suspect. And according to this article, the timing was perfect. Hansen had recently retired, but stayed with the Galveston Sheriff Department and a special part-time position, working the office's cold cases. Miller persuaded him to look at the research he had compiled, and they agreed to form a task force. Did you guys hear that splash? That was a eagle diving into the water next to him, and he grabbed a fish. It was wild. But Miller persuaded them to look at the research he had compiled, and they agreed to form a task force. The first item on their agenda was taking another look at the case of Ellen Beeson, the woman who supposedly drowned in the Hendrick's company in 1984. So remember the girl he met at that bar, and he said that she drowned, and he freaked out. And so, he stuffed her under our sofa and pretend he didn't know what happened. Anyways, Hansen learned something interesting in 1993. The police had quietly exhumed Benson's body and sent it to be evaluated by Harold Gill King, a forensic specialist at University of North Texas. Now, during the original investigation, Galveston medical examiner William had declared Benson's cause of death undeterminable. Sorry guys about that. But Gil King took one look at the remains and saw that her bones had never been properly cleaned. So, after cleaning the skull, he found a long fracture, the kind that could have only been inflicted by a considerable force. And in the spring of 2012, Hansen ordered Benson's remains again exhumed, and they sent it to Gil King for an autopsy. A new cause of death was issued, homicide. And on the 4th of April, 2013, 28 years after he was convicted of tampering with Benson's corpse, Clyde Hendrick was arrested for her murder. So, he was arrested and taken in and put behind bars. So shortly before trial, 3 inmates in the jail with Hendricks contacted a prosecutor's office that claimed that during the jailhouse conversation, Hendrick had not only admitted to beating Benson to death with a table leg, but also to murdering Laura Miller and Heidi Fye. He bragged about having sex with Laura before killing her. Now, during this trial, prosecutors filed a document, states notice an intent to use evidence of other crimes, wrongs, or acts containing a number of allegations apparently sourced from Hendrick's ex-wife, ex-girlfriends, jailmates, and others. Although the allegations, most of which were unproven and speculative, have no legal bearing, and they paint a dark pattern. Okay, so in addition to the accusing of Hendrick of physically assaulting former partners and molesting their children, the document alleges that in 1984, the defendant had sexual intercourse with the deceased body of Ellen Benson, and that between 1991 and 1993 would come back home with a different shirt and would be saying repeatedly that he had done it again. That on about 1996, he came home with a bloody knife. Asked if his then wife to get rid of it. If I can speak right, guys, I apologize. And then dyed his hair and shaved his beard. And that 2013, Hendrick stated that he has murdered 4 or 5 women during his course of his life. So he retracted his claim that his decision to hide is about his decision when he said he hid Benson's body out of fear and was wrongly accused of her death. But in response to a key point raised during the trial, it says that drowned bodies sink rather than float, as Hendrick described Benson's body doing to investigators. So he claimed that the body was floating instead of sinking. He suggested that Benson actually died in the water of drug overdose. Hendrick says, Miller got a lot of people to think that I'm the League City killer or the field killer, serial killer, he added, describing that Miller is a vindictive man with a compulsive need to point blame, which I have to agree with that. I'm the 4th man, he said, that had to be the one. All of us caused his daughter's death. Come on. This nightmare, get it over and behind me. So in a phone conversation, Hendrick's common-law wife, Gladys McKnight, told the journalist that Miller had ruined her life, and that it was one of my biggest fears all my life was growing old alone. So not only growing old alone, and that's what he says, it looks to me that's what's happening. I was used to Clyde taking care of me. I still miss him. I still love him. I've been in abusive relationships, and Clyde was kind to me. He never raised his hand to me, and that's according to his girlfriend or common-law wife, Gladys McKnight. Again, let me repeat that. But if you were thrown in a prison, would you say things to make you look big and bad if you know you're going to be stuck in there anyways? to make yourself look like you're, this one to be feared. That's what I'm wondering if Hendrick did. But then again, when they did the thing where they said the Beeson had drowned, she was floating, not sinking. But that's just still kind of odd. So it does seem like they're just desperate to find whoever killed these women without it didn't matter whether the facts were true or not. And that's kind of scary. The article continues with most 71-year-olds are sitting in lazy boys watching Oprah with their friends in a nursing home. Not really, Miller. Grinning or perhaps grimacing at the image. Miller says, I ain't ever had bed sores, as he says as he leans against his pickup truck. It was a hot afternoon on his small 7-acre ranch in Santa Fe, Texas. His horses grazed in the pasture. Behind them was a barn where he houses his Equusearch fleet of boats, trucks, and other things. Inside the barn was cool and smelled like soil. Hanging from the wall were several huge sieves on searches. He uses them to sift bone fragments from the dirt like panning for gold. Miller prefers his hands and mind occupied with a task. On the rare moments, he still has time to think. And when he thinks, he says he gets into trouble. So he works. When he isn't working with a search operation or his daughter's case, he's managing his construction company and his horses and everything. The guy has a lot of horses and stuff accused on his ranch of killing. He mucks around Miller. What it's saying is Tim Miller is trying to search for a way to forgive his killer. It's took him 25 years, but has he really? Then it goes on to say that rape and murder is a capital offense in Texas, meaning that Hendrick could face the death penalty if convicted of killing Laura. Were it up to Miller, however, he grant a full immunity to Clyde, as he always calls him, although they've never met. I think Tim realizes that he's pretty much, look where Robert Abel is right now. Did he kill those girls? But if he didn't, he went through hell. And this is the reason why the United States has innocent until proven guilty. It's not like Robert Abel said, look, I did it, like the nurse for the Kelsey Barrett case. That's different. But there was no evidence that Robert Abel had anything to do with this. And in turn, I think that's what led him to take his life. So the reason why Tim Miller is doing the Equusearch thing, it says, in exchange for confession and identities of other victims, he wants to give closure to their families, even though he knows from experience true closure is immense. Absolutely. There is no way you could ever find closure. You can only find a closing chapter. Tim Miller, as I mentioned before, has actually been working on the Andreen McDonald case and the Andreen McDonald case and the Maleah Davis case. I'm starting to get the two mixed up. I'm doing too many cases. And if you look at the backgrounds of who is involved, they say, that killers come from monsters, but we have a different type of killer today. They're not like the Clyde Hendricks, where Tim Miller says that he had a traumatic childhood, and he actually knows more about Clyde Hendrick more than anyone. He claims that Clyde was physically and emotionally and sexually abused. And this was done by their adoptive stepfather. So Tim is saying, you know, your background might create the killer that you are, but then again, he says that Miller come from, you know, a bad background and he didn't kill anybody. But he does suffer with a lot of mental issues. Tim Miller does, and you can see that. You can see that he suffers with depression, and it's ended up causing Robert Abel his life because he wasn't able to control his rage, his emotions. But Tim's good side has far outweighed the bad, but still he ignores the fact that he is suffering on a daily basis. He has done more than anyone could ever imagine when it comes to helping families that are dealing with a missing persons crisis. So Tim's background was, his childhood was pretty bad. He said his father was a gambling addict, walked out on the family when he was a child, and one day when he was 6 months old, his mother put Tim in a dresser drawer and set the house on fire with him and his brother inside. One good thing did happen to him, though. After the string of horrible experiences, the teenage Tim was taken in for 5 years by a farm family in Ohio. Tim says that's where he did gain a bit of structure and unconditional love that he needed. So, one thing that Tim Miller did for Hendrick was he bought a Bible for him and he underlined the passages about forgiveness. He had planned to give it to him but hasn't had the opportunity to do so. I emailed Tim Miller for some, hoping to interview him soon, because right now I'm going through another news article that I will post the link below later. If I forget, remind me, guys, for you guys to read over the entire thing. It's quite interesting. But this is what led him into starting this nonprofit organization, Equusearch. He is very dedicated in his work, sometimes get angry with outsiders, which I ask him to reconsider that. He says, you know, it was just recently somebody found a cell phone and they were out there just trying to help for Maleah Davis case. And he says, you know, they're doing it for the wrong reason, and some other choice words that I'm not going to say. But, and yes, they are doing it for the wrong reason. If you're out there live streaming it, I don't know if I could even judge that. It depends on how you done it. Because maybe they're using a live stream to try to get other people involved. And I don't think that's a bad thing when people are wanting to do something good. But remember, guys, you don't want to touch anything or disturb anything that you find. Leave that to the professionals. You can take pictures, but do not touch any items that you find when you're out there searching. Don't disturb any of the area around it. Call the police, get away from it, and if you really want to help and volunteer out there, make sure you get up with people with Equusearch, get trained first, and then start your own group. Anyways, guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out the second part because I wanted you guys to see who Tim Miller was, why he's out there searching for Maleah Davis, and what he is dealing with. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go over what the chief has said about the Maleah Davis case. We're going to go over some new information that we've gotten on the Maleah Davis case. And then I'm going to ask you guys to comment below to see what you think, what you feel. Because, you know, those are interesting and important too. Now, forgive me, guys, I've been very busy lately, so I've not been able to look at comments like I usually do. Maybe later I'll be able to catch up, but I'm going to try to keep up with the ones that are coming in recently if I can. So, post in comments below, what do you think about Tim Miller, especially with Robert Abel, I hope I say their names right, and Hendrick. What do you think? You got to see, you know, what they found. Who do you think is the killer? Hopefully they found the right one, because it would be a horrible. I think Tim really doesn't feel like he is comfortable where he's at. I think he's doubting himself that he caught him. But the one thing we do know is after Robert Abel was accused, there was another body. So we know it wasn't Robert, probably. And then Hendrick was still there, Hendrick. And there were still killings going on, and he was, you know, caught killing somebody. So most likely it was Hendrick. Maybe he's in denial of who the monster he become. Anyways, guys, this is end of part 2. I want to say thanks so much for watching, and I'm going to work on part 3 next. Bye bye.